Hey, we're glad you're joining us for the tour of the 7 churches of Revelation in the country of Turkey.
25 years ago, 1040 Connections began with a passion to see Ephesians 3:21 fulfilled. As you know, that verse says that God's glory will go out through the church and through Jesus. Jesus has done his part, and now it's time for the church to complete our part of moving God's glory out. In this next week, we'll be going to the 7 churches of Asia Minor, and we're excited for you to join us to see what Jesus said to the churches then and what Jesus says to the believers now.
So what we're going to do is anchor the 7 churches in a historical context. It's not mostly about what happens in the future at the end of time. It's actually a letter to the churches who are existing at that time, and there are real strong cultural informations and applications that they needed to apply themselves. So we'll give you 2 names of Roman emperors that you need to know about. One's name is Nero, probably heard of him, and Domitian. These are 2 main emperors who are really persecuting the Christians horribly. And so the tendency would be for Christians to either go along with them and do emperor worship, or to give up hope and despair whether God is going to win, whether Jesus will be victorious over the prevailing kings of that time.
Now, the literature of Revelation, we need to understand what the literature was all about so that we can better understand the historical context that Jesus was telling to the 7 churches. Now, one is that Revelation is apocalyptic literature. Now, what does that actually mean? Now, in today's time, we think when we hear apocalypse, we think of what happens at the end of time. But that's not the way the Hebrew listeners of the Hebrew scriptures understood apocalyptic. And that's because of the Hebrew word, which was galah, and the Greek word, which is apocalypto, which what it really meant was not the end of time and the chronological ordering of the end of time. It actually meant an unveiling or an uncovering of an understanding of what it was supposed to be meaning. So basically,
a revelation.
Yeah, it's a revelation. So basically this was like where God would unfold a veil and would give a divine understanding of what was happening in current historical reality, to give the ultimate reality, to help the people to understand better what God was trying to say and what God's ultimate reality was in a historical context. What we see in the book of Revelation is it's an unveiling of the cosmic battle that we see that was set up in Genesis 3, and it's the cosmic battle of evil versus good, of God versus Satan. And when we look at that from the apocalyptic understanding, we understand that God has a message to the churches understanding this cosmic battle. The second type of literature that we see in the book of Revelation is prophecy. And you see this in Revelation 1, where John the apostle is saying, I'm bringing a prophetic message. You need to not add to this message, but you need to understand this message. In biblical times, a prophetic message was always an encouragement, and it was a challenge. So the encouragement is, in the book of Revelation, we see a comfort to the churches, the 7 churches. We see the comfort is, God is going to win. Ultimately, evil will be put down by Jesus Christ. And second, we see a challenge or a warning where God is saying, look, the tendency is going to want to go along with the Roman Empire. It's going to be a tendency to go along and make smaller allegiances. But these allegiances will be judged. There will be a judgment of all evil, and you don't want to get caught up underneath that judgment because you've given in to smaller allegiances. And third, we see that this is actually a pastoral letter that's given to 7 churches. And the 7 churches of Asia Minor received all 22 chapters of Revelation. And it's in these letters that the church is encouraged on how to live undergoing extreme persecution. The church was given 2 choices at this time. 1, faithfulness to Jesus Christ, regardless of the cost. Or 2, the warning of compromise, of giving into apathy, to giving into smaller allegiances, to be tolerant, to compromise. And throughout the book of Revelation, we see that Jesus is offering these 2 choices, faithfulness or compromise.
All right, so as we look at Revelation 1, before we get to the 7 churches of chapter 2 and 3, we see that Jesus is described in verse 5 from Jesus Christ, who is the faithful witness. He's the firstborn from among the dead. He's also called the ruler of kings of the earth. So what does this mean? He's faithful, so you should be faithful. He's a witness, so we should be a witness. He's firstborn among the dead, which means you might be dying if you're reading this letter. He's the ruler of the kings of the earth, which means there are kings of the earth who are going to be challenging his rulership. He loves us. He frees us from sin. He makes us a kingdom and priests. So He's coming again. There is hope that he's returning, and he's the Alpha and the Omega. So there are a number of items about the character and the identity and the nature of Jesus that we can trust that he is able to handle all the difficulties that the churches in Turkey are facing at that time. As you look further on, John actually comes face to face with Jesus. And the way Jesus is described, if you read this slowly, it's really terrifying, actually. And of course, he fell to the ground as like he was dead, and Jesus had to say, "Fear not." So Jesus is described as the Son of Man. He is described as one walking in the midst of the lampstands. He's wearing a robe with a sash. He has hair like white wool. His eyes are like blazing fire. His feet are like bronze. His voice is like rushing water. In his right hand, he's holding stars. That's outstanding. In his mouth, it's a double-edged sword. His face is like the sun. He speaks, and it's just overwhelming to John. And so he's talking about the angels. He's talking about the lampstands. And so in this revelation where Jesus reveals himself, he's setting the stage for how he's going to begin talking with the early churches in chapters 2 and 3. But this initial revelation of Jesus, John fell to the ground like he was dead, and Jesus placed his hand on him and said, "Do not be afraid. I'm the first and last. I'm the living one." So we can see we're expecting to have an encounter with Jesus. We're expecting to have a new understanding, a revelation of who Jesus is and what his message is for the church today. And then,
so when you look through the book of Revelation, you see that what Jesus describes as the overcomers or the conquerors are those who are faithful to Jesus no matter the cost, even if it ends up leading to your death. Years ago, we were in China, and there were these two students that came to our home. And we opened the door to them, and they were standing there, and they looked confused, and they said, "We've been reading the book of Revelation, and we're confused. We see the 7 stars, the 7 lampstands. We're just confused about the 7 bowls and the 7 scrolls." And we looked at them and we said, "Oh, you're trying to understand the book of Revelation. That is such an easy book to understand." And they were quite shocked to hear us think that it was so easy. And we said, "We can actually describe it with 2 words. And they said, "You can." And they thought we must be brilliant. And we said, the conclusion of the book of Revelation is Jesus wins. And that is the conclusion. Jesus, King of Kings and Lord of Lords, is going to put down all evil. Jesus is making a new beginning. Heaven and earth will be joined together. Jesus Christ will win. But the question we're asking ourselves as we take the tour of these 7 churches, and the question we're asking you is, will you win? Because Jesus says that those of us who hold true to Jesus' word, those of us who hold true to Jesus and to the highest allegiance of Jesus Christ in our lives, we are those who are considered the winners. Throughout the book of Revelation, we see that Jesus calls the faithful to Jesus to the very end, those who are steadfast and endure no matter the cost. They are the ones that are called the overcomers. They are the ones that are called the conquerors. Jesus invites in the book of Revelation all of us who are thirsty to come to Jesus. And in this next week, as we tour these 7 churches, we're asking Jesus to make us thirsty. Make us thirsty for God's word and help us to be faithful to God's word so that we will be called faithful overcomers and conquerors. We invite you to join us, and we're excited to join you tomorrow as well.
And tomorrow we're going to be going over the brief history of the early church, along with Emperor Constantine and his impact on the early Christian practices. See you then.
See you tomorrow.